There was a time when I felt like I was living life on autopilot, caught in a relentless cycle of reacting to every little thing around me. My days blurred into each other. 15 alarms, a rushing commute, emails demanding urgent replies before I even had time to think. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, the house silent except for the drone of the city outside, and realizing something was deeply off. I was exhausted in a way that coffee couldn't fix, foggy in my focus, and strangely disconnected from myself. I couldn't name it then, but something fundamental inside me had shifted. The measure of my energy wasn't about how many hours I put in anymore. It was about the sense that I was no longer steering my own ship. That feeling, this slow erosion of control, was subtle at first. I didn't wake up one day feeling powerless. It was more like a whisper that grew louder every time I missed a deadline or felt like I was scrambling to patch things up. The fire I once carried, the resilience and confidence I thought were constants, just dimmed a little more each week. I told myself I was just tired, that stress was normal, that managing so many demands was how life worked. But deep down, I knew there was more. I began to question where this worn-out version of myself really came from, and why it felt so hard to reclaim my drive. I started observing my body and mind, trying to decode the signals I'd been ignoring. Why was my energy so inconsistent? Why did motivation vanish when I needed it most? I noticed how my muscles felt slack, how my thinking slowed, and how every evening I crumbled into bed, worn thin by battles no one could see. I juggled responsibilities, yes, but it was like my hands were tied behind my back. I was promptly extinguishing crises, reacting to constant stimuli, never setting the pace, always running after it. Talking to other men confirmed what I suspected. This wasn't just me. Many of us live in this state of frantic response, where time is the enemy, decisions feel imposed, and the rhythm of life isn't ours to choose. It's a subtle kind of imprisonment, one that doesn't necessarily come from external forces alone. It comes from a quiet surrender to circumstance that our bodies somehow recognize. It's as if somewhere beneath awareness, our internal compass starts to wobble and then spins out, leaving us adrift in a sea of pressure without any anchor. I remember a moment during a conversation with a close friend, a man I respect for his strength and groundedness. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "It's not about what you're doing. It's about who's in charge." That hit me hard. I realized that my struggle wasn't a failure of effort but a loss of internal leadership. My body, my energy, my sense of purpose responded not just to what I did day to day but to who I allowed to call the shots in my life. When that who is vague or weakened, everything else crumbles with it. The truth is, feeling drained, procrastinating, or endlessly chasing tasks might feel like random struggles or character flaws, but they are often symptoms of something deeper. An internal system wired to prioritize survival over growth when it senses confusion or chaos in its own command. In those moments, our biology shifts gears, not for expansion or strength, but for adaptation and defense. That's a profound realization that reframed everything for me. The problem wasn't that I was not working hard enough or lacked ability. My body was simply responding to a deeper signal that I was out of sync with my own direction. That night, when I finally allowed myself to admit I was stuck, something else happened. I found the first glimpse of hope. It wasn't wrapped in a quick fix or a motivational slogan, but in a quiet understanding that my energy, my drive, and even my sense of masculinity were intimately connected to how in control I felt within. It was a shift in seeing that leadership isn't about external dominance, but about an internal state where my body trusts me to hold the reins. Before I took that step, I had spent months lost in confusion and frustration, unsure why my vitality was slipping through my fingers. Now, I was beginning a journey, not to scramble harder or white-knuckle through the noise, but to create space inside where my system could feel safe, steady, and ready to invest in growth rather than mere survival. The idea that small choices, made consistently, could rebuild that sense of control and restore my energy was both humbling and powerful. As you listen, I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, where in your life do you feel that same loss of control? Is it in your time, your relationships, your work, or even within yourself? That question matters because wherever you sense that gap, your energy has likely been quietly draining away without your notice. It's not just about willpower or motivation. Your body is reading the signs and adjusting its chemistry accordingly, trying to protect you from chaos. This realization invites us into a conversation deeper than just habits or discipline. It's about reclaiming the internal command center and allowing our bodies to respond with purpose and vigor, not just reaction and exhaustion. This moment right here, this reflection we're sharing, is the doorway into that transformation. It's not easy and it's not instant, but it's real and it's possible. So as we move forward, keep that question close to your heart. Where have you given away your control? Because finding the answer is where the energy begins to return, where clarity rises, and where your system starts to trust that you are at the helm again. This is the journey I've been on, the path that brought me back from the edge of depletion, and it's the path I want to walk with you now. I remember the moment I realized something fundamental had shifted inside me was when I tried to carve out a morning routine. I woke early one Saturday, determined to greet the day with intention rather than scrambling out of bed reacting to an alarm. As I settled into quiet stillness, a creeping restlessness rose within me. My thoughts scattered across unfinished work, obligations pending, and a tangled web of responsibilities humming louder than the silence around me. My mind darted frantically like a caged animal, desperate to break free but tethered to invisible strings. It was in that moment, frozen between calm aspiration and internal chaos, that I understood the deeper battle. Control, or what I perceived as its absence, was not merely about schedules but about commanding the narrative running in my head. Until I learned to govern that mental terrain, my physical energy remained hostage to turmoil. Gradually, I started tuning into the quiet undercurrents shaping my experience. It became clear that the commands I issued to myself lacked clarity and consistency. Ambiguity seeped into my thoughts and routines, spinning a house of cards that tumbled with the slightest pressure. In contrast, I knew men who carried an unmistakable calm, the kind forged not from absence of hardship but from habitual, intentional ownership of their domain. They moved with steadiness, their bodies attuned to a rhythm that felt earned and genuine. It dawned on me that this equilibrium originated not externally but from a relentless interior assertiveness, a daily reaffirmation of sovereignty over mind and moment. Reflecting on this, I recalled a conversation with Marcus, a friend whose presence always exuded grounded authority. He recounted how small wins, making definitive choices on trivial matters, like what to eat or how to organize a day, accumulated into profound shifts. When you stop tolerating indecision, he told me, your energy builds batteries you didn't even know were dead. His analogy shocked me. Energy as dormant power cells awaiting charge. It suggested vitality isn't sprinkled like fairy dust but generated through precise, repeated acts of self-command. This idea resonated deeper than any pep talk. It revealed a cause behind the exhaustion, turning insight into actionable revelation. Later, I faced an unexpected test of this newfound perspective during a challenging project at work. Instead of dissolving in reactive overwhelm, I forced myself to claim ownership of each step, dictating terms rather than succumbing to the push and pull of external urgencies. Each decision I made was deliberate, cutting through the fog and anchoring me in presence. The tangible shift surprised me. Stress still hovered, but my body no longer cringed. Hormones aligned with a clear mandate, fueling me rather than depleting me. This wasn't magic. It was biology responding to the authority signal streaming from my psyche. Weeks passed, and this practice became a quiet revolution. My mornings no longer began in firefighting mode, but with conscious setting of intention. I made it a habit to identify one small area where I could exert leadership, whether it was completing a project section or defining boundaries with a colleague, and then followed through without wavering. Every successful assertion, no matter how modest, fostered resilience and restored a physical vitality I hadn't realized was missing. Times I stumbled. Old habits of acquiescence crept in like shadows threatening to erode progress. One afternoon, after an exhausting string of distractions, I caught myself sinking into self-pity and inertia. But instead of falling into despair, I paused and centered myself with a simple question: who's in charge here? The answer reverberated back with surprising force. That mental checkpoint became a tool I wielded regularly, vaporizing doubt and reclaiming initiative when lethargy or uncertainty threatened to derail my momentum. What captivated me was how this internal sovereignty didn't just resurrect energy levels. It transformed my interaction with the world. Confidence emerged, not the brash, showy kind, but a quiet, unwavering assurance rooted in the foundation of consistent self-mastery. Challenges ceased to intimidate because I had cultivated an inner command post, a place of clarity and resolve. As a result, testosterone, as an emblem of vitality, felt less like an elusive prize and more like a natural byproduct of disciplined self-governance. Now, think about the demands you face daily. Consider how often they pull you into reactive cycles where time and choices slip out of your grasp. When overwhelmed, your system naturally shifts into preservation mode, sidelining growth hormones and investment in strength. However, by consciously practicing control in even the smallest domains, saying no to distractions, planning your rhythm, choosing your battles, you create cracks in the chaotic shell. These cracks become avenues for energy to break through. I invite you, as you read these words, to reflect on the incremental decisions you habitually hand over to automatic response or external pressure. Imagine reclaiming those moments as deliberate acts of ownership. Picture your body ramping up power reserves, fueled by clear, consistent commands signaling all systems go. Surrendering control, though tempting, ultimately weakens this potential. But firm, loving stewardship of your inner universe builds a fortress from which vitality naturally flows. Through this lens, control transforms from an abstract concept to a practical and profoundly embodied practice. It's not a demand for perfection but an ongoing dialogue with yourself, affirming leadership, rewiring ingrained patterns, and nurturing an energetic ecosystem that supports growth over mere survival. This practice requires patience, persistence, and humility, but offers rich rewards: clarity in confusion, vitality in fatigue, and poise in chaos. My journey revealed how mastery over attention and choice shapes much more than productivity or habit. It carves the path for life force itself. In moments when overwhelm threatens, I remind myself that control is not a fixed destination but a muscle strengthened by intention. By flexing it daily, I create a pulse of power that radiates through my being and spills over into every arena. This steady rhythm of command whispers a profound truth. When we lead ourselves with courage and conviction, energy doesn't flicker. It blazes, unstoppable and true. There was an afternoon that remains etched in my memory. A day when the mounting pressure felt like a storm crashing over me from all directions. I was sitting in a cramped conference room, surrounded by voices clamoring for immediate decisions, last-minute changes, and endless compromises. Each suggestion seemed to chip away at my resolve, and within, a creeping sensation settled. I was losing hold of my own influence. Yet, in that heated moment, I became aware of an unexpected realization. Control isn't always a loud assertion or dramatic gesture. Sometimes, it's a quiet act of reclaiming calm amid chaos. I tightened my grip on my breath, centered my thoughts, and allowed myself to navigate the storm with a subtle yet unshakable steadiness. The energy this shift sparked felt like a secret current beneath the surface, powering me through what might have otherwise overwhelmed. As I reflected later that evening, I understood this experience unveiled a dimension of control I hadn't fully grasped before, a dynamic interplay between presence and influence. Most often, we mistake control for outright command or rigid dominance, but it can instead blossom from attentiveness, the ability to catch the pulse of a moment and respond from a grounded stillness. Like a seasoned sailor reading shifting winds and tides, wielding influence without fighting the ocean. This nuanced understanding freed me from the exhausting pursuit of micromanagement and allowed energy to flow fluidly. I now see that when we attune ourselves sharply to our internal compass, control radiates outward naturally, demanding far less force but yielding far greater impact. I remember sharing this insight with a mentor I deeply respect, a man whose years in leadership have been marked by unwavering calmness rather than grandstanding. He shared how many men mistake relentless hustle for strength, exhausting their vitality chasing fleeting victories. True power, he said, comes from knowing what's yours to hold close and what you must let pass. It's an art of discernment as much as action. Those words resonated deeply. I began practicing this art, learning to discern when a situation warranted my full engagement and when stepping back was the wiser claim of strength. Each choice sharpened my connection to inner authority and fueled a steady pulse of vitality that neither hurried nor feared the unknown. Building on this, however, I noticed how the rhythm of my day shifted tremendously once I honored moments of pause. We often equate productivity with constant motion, but I found that deliberate stillness, intentional breaks to center and reset, replenished my reservoirs more effectively than sheer busyness ever could. In embracing these pauses, I cultivated an internal sanctuary where control was refined rather than relinquished. It was in the quiet intervals that my nervous system relaxed, reaffirming to my biology that I was not in constant threat, allowing greater balance between fight or flight triggers and restorative processes. From this place, my energy moved from scrambling toward abundance, testosterone production finding fertile ground in a body less entangled with survival impulses. Another crucial layer emerged through connection, especially how relationships reflect and influence our grasp on self-governance. I noticed that environments buzzing with unpredictability or emotional turbulence pulled me into reactive patterns, diluting my sense of command. In contrast, meaningful connections grounded in authenticity and mutual respect nurtured my confidence to steer my course. It was as if the presence of a trusted ally or confidant bestowed a subtle badge of inner permission to claim leadership, reminding my organism that I was safe to expand rather than contract. These relationships mapped a mirror to my control, amplifying my capacity to hold boundaries and express desires clearly without guilt or hesitation. When I faced setbacks or unexpected disruptions, I started invoking a metaphor that helped transform overwhelm, imagining my control as a flame protected from the wind inside a glass lantern. Sometimes the breeze outside flickers dangerously, other times it howls, but the lantern sustains the fire, shielding it just enough to keep it alive until calm returns. This visualization empowered me to keep up my charge even in periods of instability, honoring vulnerability without surrendering command. The metaphor painted control as dynamic, flexible, yet fiercely guarded, emphasizing the delicate stewardship energy demands. Now, consider how this applies when you face abrupt challenges at work or in your personal life. Have you noticed moments when your immediate reaction leans toward panic or freeze because your internal signals send a danger alert? I have. But through steady practice, I learned to recalibrate those alerts with mindful actions. Breath control, grounding, focused attention, and each small intervention felt like reclaiming a parcel of command once lost. It wasn't a grand overhaul overnight, but incremental wins stitched together by persistence. This gave rise to a lived proof. Control is a muscle strengthened through gentle insistence, ever ready to spring into action when summoned. At one point, I tested this newfound control during a grueling family situation. My youngest son was struggling at school, and the emotional weight threatened to tip me toward reactive frustration or helplessness. Instead, I paused, acknowledged my feelings, then chose to respond with clarity, setting expectations and offering support calmly. It was my first time navigating such a crisis without tumbling into chaos. Watching the ripple effect, the shift in his behavior, the softened atmosphere, confirmed how internal leadership can reshape external realities. My energy felt whole in a way it hadn't in years, fueled by the tangible impact of my deliberate steadiness. Ultimately, this immersive journey through subtlety, presence, and relational grounding reshaped how I experience command. It wasn't a battle to be won, but an ongoing dance with self-awareness, powered by intentional attention and compassionate resolve. I invite you to test your own lantern against the gusts today, gently reinforcing your inner flame with deliberate breath, mindful boundaries, and authentic connection. In this space, control becomes less a straitjacket and more a liberation, unlocking reservoirs of masculine energy that were quietly waiting for permission to ignite. The day I really confronted the edges of my own inertia is etched sharply in my memory. I sat at my kitchen table, daylight waning, pages of an unfinished creative project splayed before me, yet my mind was a whirlwind of excuses and distractions. It wasn't a lack of ability. I'd mastered the skills years prior. What gnawed at me was something more elusive, a creeping surrender to a sensation that my internal compass was blunted, that the familiar momentum I once commanded had slipped between my fingers. Instead of tackling the work, I found myself scrolling through news feeds, each swipe amplifying an unspoken message inside. I wasn't in control. That evening ignited a relentless pursuit to dissect how subtle shifts in decision-making habits steer the tides of masculine vigor. One of the most powerful realizations came when I began exploring the concept of delayed gratification, a principle that transcends ordinary discipline. A friend, Paul, a man whose quiet strength always registered like a steady heartbeat in any room, shared how his morning ritual, choosing a single priority and following through completely before moving on, transformed his energy levels profoundly. He likened it to planting seeds deliberately in a garden. If you scatter carelessly or give up mid-tend, growth falters. But patience and steady cultivation allowed roots to deepen and blooms to flourish. Inspired, I started small, choosing one daily decision, a conversation, a workout, even a moment of silence, to see it through entirely, no interruptions, no mental bailouts. What unfolded was unexpected. That consistent follow-through fostered an internal rhythm that synced body and mind in new ways. Fatigue began to retreat, replaced by a palpable sensation of momentum that didn't demand frantic effort to sustain. The process was akin to a metronome establishing tempo where before only chaotic noise existed. Rather than depleting resources through scattered energy, I harnessed them through intentional sequencing. Each choice completed added a charge, cumulatively strengthening my sense of command. This discovery revealed a fascinating truth. Mastery over energy emerges not from heroic stamina, but from cultivating patterns of completion. Alongside this, I noticed how the language I used internally influenced the body's receptiveness to vitality. Self-talk morphed from vague, passively anxious murmurs to precise, affirmative declarations. Instead of telling myself, "I don't have time" or "I'm overwhelmed," I shifted toward phrases like, "I am choosing this" or "This task aligns with my goals." It became increasingly clear that these linguistic shifts recalibrated my nervous system below conscious awareness, aligning biochemical cascades with the messages woven through my thoughts. Through this lens, words became more than communication. They emerged as tools to architect the very environments I inhabited within. A particularly transformative encounter unfolded when I revisited an old hobby, woodworking. I had abandoned it during busier seasons, convinced it was a luxury rather than a necessity. Dusting off my tools one weekend, I felt the familiar tactile pleasure of shaping raw wood via deliberate cuts and polish. The process required patience, precision, and acceptance of imperfection. As hours passed, the rhythmic motions connected to a deeper source of pride and control, a tangible confrontation to the impersonality of digital life. That workshop became a sacred space where the body's innate yearning for mastery met creative expression. Strength brewed quietly in those unhurried moments, fueling a renewal beyond words. Daily, I found myself experimenting with micro-decisions influencing sensory input. For instance, shifting from harsh fluorescent lighting to the warm glow of natural sunlight altered my alertness markedly. Choosing a single nourishing meal, rich in color and texture, awakened sensations of vitality and groundedness. Gradually, I curated an environment echoing stability and intentionality, displacing the unseen chaos that had gnawed at my core. These subtleties reiterated a profound reality. Our organism thrives on predictability harnessed through deliberate stimulus control, weaving energy renewal into the fabric of everyday experience. On a more intimate level, resolving tensions in personal relationships became an unexpected arena for reclaiming leadership. I discovered that addressing conflict with clarity and calm fostered mutual respect, which in turn reinforced my internal authority. One evening, after weeks of simmering disagreement with a close friend, I chose transparency over avoidance. Our conversation was honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but carried by a shared dedication to truth. This exchange redefined boundaries constructively, and in doing so, expanded my capacity to navigate emotional complexities without sacrificing power or empathy. I realized that establishing this kind of internal equilibrium quietly amplified resilience, providing fertile ground for energy to thrive. Once, during an unplanned solo hike across a rugged ridge, The raw solitude offered unexpected insight. Far from distractions, the relentless pace of nature's rhythms invited me into an elemental dialogue with myself. Each deliberate step forward crystallized a renewed sense of ownership over my direction. The wilderness stripped away superficial demands, leaving only the essential, simply moving intentionally through uneven terrain. This physical navigation mirrored my internal journey, grappling with uncertainty yet progressing resolutely. The hike impressed upon me how reclaiming control requires confronting discomfort and embracing the unknown, forging confidence not through familiarity but through courageous adaptation. Facing all these experiences, I came to welcome the paradox that control isn't synonymous with rigidity. Instead, it incorporates fluid responsiveness anchored by a deep, unwavering core. Just like a river carves its course by balancing strength and flexibility, embodying command entails guiding oneself with firm intention while allowing necessary shifts. This idea reshaped how I relate to obstacles and setbacks, seeing them less as failures and more as tributaries feeding a broader current of evolution. Through this framework, masculine energy blossomed as an emergent property of cultivated wisdom applied moment by moment. I encourage you, as you reflect on your own sense of command emerging or waning, to explore these subtle territories within your life. Identify one intricate choice, perhaps long overlooked, that you can approach with fresh intentionality today. Pay close attention to how focusing on completion, refining your inner dialogue, adjusting your environment, or courageously addressing relationship dynamics transforms the quality of your energy. Through such refined acts, the hidden reservoir of masculine vitality begins to stir, ready to support your unfolding journey with renewed power and clarity. As I journey deeper into understanding the subtle currents that govern our vitality, I find myself standing at a crossroads where countless threads interlace, weaving a tapestry far more intricate than I initially imagined. Each revelation has acted like a stone placed carefully in a riverbed, shaping the flow beneath my feet. The water's surface ripples differently now, calmer in some places, energized in others, yet always moving forward, compelling me to step further into the unknown. It's a peculiar sensation, this mix of anticipation and quiet assurance stirring simultaneously inside, as if the body and mind have begun a wordless dialogue that only grows richer with time. I recall evenings when the weight of unresolved questions clouded my thoughts, leaving a haze that seemed impenetrable. Yet, as these ideas accumulated, they bore a strange kind of light, one that didn't shout or demand, but invited reflection and curiosity. It became clear that the journey isn't about exerting control over every single element, but about cultivating an innate rhythm that harmonizes with life's unpredictable cadence. I've come to recognize how essential it is to inhabit a space where decisive action and patient observation coexist, creating fertile ground for resilience to thrive. This delicate balance feels less like steering a ship against a storm and more like learning to surf the waves with grace, aligning strength with sensitivity. In moments of solitude, I've sensed a shift unfurling beneath the surface, an awakening of sorts not triggered by external victories, but by subtle affirmations whispered inwardly. It's a quiet revolution, manifested in the gentle steadiness that grows when vigilance softens and clarity seeps in. I've begun to understand how our body's very chemistry responds dramatically to the narrative spun in our minds, coloring the palette of energy available for engagement. The dance between biology and psyche is more intimate than I'd allowed myself to imagine, a choreography choreographed in the spaces between thought and breath. This realization changes the stakes entirely. It nudges me to steward my inner landscape with reverence, knowing that each choice ripples outward in ways unseen yet profoundly felt. There's a narrative emerging, one not solely about regaining momentum or conquering obstacles, but about embodying a renewed allegiance to oneself that quietly commands respect. It's as if a dormant beacon flickers back to life, casting shadows aside gently but persistently, beckoning me to inhabit a fuller expression of my potential. This beacon doesn't demand spectacle. It simply presides, a solid presence grounding turbulent currents. Within this metaphor, I see the task not as an act of domination but an invitation to nurture sovereignty that is simultaneously strong and supple, unyielding yet adaptable. When embraced, It cultivates an energy that feels inexhaustible, a wellspring beneath the surface that sustains through cycles of action and rest alike. Walking this path has uncovered nuances about the nature of power that defy simplistic definitions. Real authority, I perceive more keenly now, emerges when the pressure to perform loosens and is replaced by a trust in one's own unfolding ahead. It is not forceful but magnetic, a silent gravity pulling disparate aspects of existence into cohesion. This gravity doesn't repel challenge but absorbs it, transforming friction into fuel. I've watched how in allowing this shift, layers of tension gradually dissolve, replaced by fluidity tinted with purpose. What once seemed like constant friction now reveals itself as an invitation, a call to move more fully, respond with clarity, and rest in authenticity. I imagine reaching out across all the moments spun like threads in a vast loom, seeing how they intertwine not merely as individual lessons but as a single expansive fabric that holds possibilities yet to be realized. The edges of this fabric are frayed in places, hinting at the work still ahead, but the core gleams with strength forged in challenge and insight. I sense that this fabric will envelop me in the days to come, a living garment that adapts and grows with every conscious step taken. It cradles the promise that energy is not a finite resource lost to circumstance, but a dynamic flow renewed in cycles of intentionality, surrender, and brave assertion. Reflecting on this journey so far, I feel a subtle invitation to lean into the unfolding tension between effort and ease, between navigating uncertainty and anchoring presence. It's a dance where each moment offers a choice, to contract in response to fear or to extend into trust. Such choices, though often quiet, hold transformative power. They craft a terrain where our vitality is refreshed, and the story of our masculine energy finds its authentic rhythm. It's here, on this precipice, that I recognize the real movement isn't in external changes alone, but in the way I engage with myself, how I recognize my capacity to lead from within with fierce compassion and unwavering clarity. This understanding stirs a readiness to cross beyond what has been familiar and step boldly into the expansive possibility that awaits on the horizon. I often recall a quiet evening when the world outside faded to a gentle hush, and I found myself alone with nothing but my thoughts swirling in the dim light. A soft breeze brushed through the open window, carrying the faint scent of rain, and in that stillness, a revelation settled deep within me. Not as a sudden epiphany, but as a tender unfolding. I realized control wasn't an external prize to seize or a fortress to guard, but a delicate pulse beating at the core of my being. It moved beneath my skin in subtle rhythms, responding not to force or struggle, but to the gentle insistence of presence and intention intertwined. In that moment, I understood for the first time how my body, mind, and spirit converse in whispers so faint that I had spent years mistaking their silence for weakness. Each habitual surrender to distraction, hesitation, or doubt was not a failure of will but a fading of the signal I was supposed to send to myself. I am the author of my time, the holder of my pace, the leader within. Without that signal, my organism, trusting what it knows, lowered the flames that feed vitality because it perceived uncertainty as a cue to conserve energy, not invest in expansion. I saw how desperately I needed to rekindle this internal message, not through grand gestures or rigid schedules, but through countless tiny affirmations that I embrace my sovereignty moment by moment. As days turned into weeks, I watched that gentle flame grow. It didn't roar or dominate the darkness. Instead, it cast a steady glow that invited me to lean in closer, to witness my own resilience awakening beneath the surface of routine. I noticed how the body adjusted, how energy rippled through muscles once slack, how my thought patterns gained a new richness, a layering of deliberate awareness upon instinct. The intricate dance between intention and embodiment was no longer abstract. It was flesh and blood, breath and heartbeat, real and alive. This dance called forth a strength I had mistaken for lost, teaching me that true power doesn't demand constant prove-it moments but flows from a reservoir replenished by authentic self-governance. At times, challenges still surged. Unexpected demands, emotional storms, moments when old patterns tugged insistently to drag me backward. Yet, with growing tenderness toward myself, I learned to welcome these tests not as betrayals of progress but as invitations to refine the art of inner leadership. I pictured my energy as a river navigating stones and bends, encountering resistance yet never ceasing its course. Control, then, became a fluid movement, shaped and shifted by circumstance yet rooted firmly in the knowledge that I am the source anchoring this flow. Each choice to engage or refuse, to pause or advance, held meaning beyond immediate outcomes. It was a testament to my commitment to steward my vitality and direction. There was a night when exhaustion tempted me toward surrender. The lingering heaviness on my chest whispered that my efforts were futile. Instead of succumbing, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, tracing the arc of my journey with quiet gratitude. In that breath, I felt the pulse once more, subtle, steady, undeniable. It reminded me that leadership of self is not perfection but persistence, not domination but dialogue, not command imposed from outside but sovereignty awakened from within. The energy I craved was never lost but patiently waiting beneath layers of fear and distraction, ready to surge when called home. Now, I speak these truths as a companion standing beside anyone who recognizes that inner drift, anyone who understands how easily days can fragment under weight too heavy to carry alone. I urge you to listen for that whisper beneath the noise, to honor the tremulous flame within you with reverence and patience. Begin small, choosing a single moment to assert your presence. Guard it fiercely, nurture it tenderly, and watch as the current behind your steps returns, growing stronger with every deliberate wave. This is where our masculine energy finds fertile soil, in the sacred dance between surrender and command, in the tender reclamation of our own time, pace, and purpose. The journey is neither swift nor simple, yet its rewards ripple eternally. As I continue to walk this path, I understand more deeply that true expansion begins where we invite ourselves to lead, not with force, but with compassion and unwavering intention. What feels elusive becomes tangible. What once seemed lost emerges as an unbreakable current carrying us forward. In this shared holding of space and possibility, we discover the power that never truly left us. The power to govern our lives, ignite our energy, and become the architects of a vitality that sustains and inspires beyond measure.